follow Jesus is a phrase that you will hear if you've grown up in a church, if you attend this church somewhat frequently or come weekly, you will hear that phrase. Hey, we want to be a church that helps you follow Jesus. But in that phrase, really, it can be ambiguous, right? What does that even mean to follow Jesus? You've heard it. You're going to hear it more. And so what I want to help do is really to give us something to grasp onto, some real specific ways that you and I can follow Jesus and even understand what that means. The reason we use that phrase, and that you've perhaps have heard that phrase used in a variety of places, is because when Jesus comes to those men who would be his first disciples, the thing that he says to them is, follow me. Now, the encouraging thing about that, Jesus says, follow me, and then he says, I will make you something different. I will make you fishers of men. He tells Peter, hey, that's right, I am the Messiah, and you will be the rock on which I build the church. And so the beautiful thing, Jesus is saying to us the same thing, hey, follow me, and he will do the making, or perhaps a better way to say it, he will do the remaking in us, which is good that you and I don't have to produce that on our own. If you're like me, I've tried with valiant effort at times to produce change or transformation in my own heart and life. And the reality is, hey, I need to get in line with who he is, what he's doing, what he has for me, what the motivation and attitude of my heart should be. And then let's see if he can transform me in the process. So we're starting this Next Step series this morning. It's a phrase we use a lot, next steps or follow Jesus, because we want to bring clarity to what this means for you. And so we're going to give a variety of topics starting this morning over the next several weeks and just say, hey, this could be a next step for you. Now, the real interesting thing that I want to be really clear always, but especially this morning, is that your next step probably isn't the same next step in faith as the person sitting beside you. But I do believe for every person in this room, regardless of where you are on the faith continuum, like whether you and Jesus are BFF and it's all going well, or whether you think he's made up like other people that are made up. I was about to lose my credential with the kids for a second. Whether you think he's just made up. Wow. Didn't say it. Anything. Wherever you are on the faith continuum, I believe that for every one of us in this room, we could take a next step in our exploration of faith. Even if we've been following Jesus a long time, I think we've got a real good grip on what that means. There's still a next step for us to take this morning. And so I really want to invite you into that. But our next step isn't going to be the same. Like my next step probably isn't the same as any other person's in this room. And your next step probably isn't even the same as the person you're sitting beside this morning. Even if you spend all day and night and you're like married to them, probably your next step is something different. And so what we want to champion as a church is, hey, we don't want all of you to take step A, whatever A is. We want us collectively to take the next step God has for us, whatever it may be. Let me illustrate it this way. Anyone ever been to Nikiski, Alaska? Anybody? Only me. Awesome. Okay, it's a place you need to know about. But in 2007, my wife and I and my two oldest boys and Lindsay Lee, who's on our staff, we took about 70 college students there. So to illustrate it, let's say that over the next 48 hours, you and I are going to leave from 543 Howard Street in San Francisco, and we're going to drive to Nikiski, Alaska. Well, a couple of things you need to know about this trip. Google Maps says there are 36 steps on this trip. Some are big steps, some are small steps. One of the biggest ones would be you and I would spend 802 miles on Interstate 5. So just lock that in, whatever that means to you. Interstate 5, 802 miles. I won't ask for bathroom breaks yet because I've got a good illustration on that coming up too. So 36 steps, 2,800 miles total. The longest stretch on I-5, 802 miles at one time. You'll have to take 2 ferries, and Google estimates that it'll take you 2 days and 16 hours to get from right here where we're sitting this morning to Nikiski, Alaska. Now, if Tim Milner, our executive pastor, was one of your passengers, you need to know he goes to the restroom every 37 minutes on the highway. And so if you're in the car with him, estimate 3 days, 16 hours. But there's a great reason for that. He can give you the science behind it if you need it. Now, let's say that we leave over a span of 48 hours. A couple of things you also need to know is that there's 2 ferries involved between here and Nikiski that you're going to need to make sure you get on. Let's say, so everyone leaves at different times over the next 48 hours, and I'm kind of running headquarters right here in San Francisco, and there's a conference call, and everybody's on the line, and people want to know, hey, Ben, what should we do next? Remember, you've left at different times over 2 days. No telling where you are. We all know we're headed from here to Nikiski. And I just say to you, hey, you guys need to go another 5.5 miles and then turn right. Now, for the person who was at that step and they were ready to go 5.5 miles and turn right, you would be in awesome shape, would you not? Everyone else would be sorely messed up. True? So what we want to say as a church in the same way is, hey, all of us would eventually, if we took those 36 steps, we would arrive in Nikiski, Alaska, and it would be great. In fact, if you guys are up for it, just let me know. We'll clear the schedule and go for it. We would all end up there. And the same thing is true. God has an intended destination for every one of us. No matter where you are on the faith continuum, even if you're like, Ben, I don't even believe that. He still has it. It's awesome. Like, it doesn't even matter, right? And here's where he wants you to end up. He wants you and I to become mature followers or disciples of Jesus. That's the destination. So just like Nikiski, right? The way you're going to get there is to realize where you are and what's the next step that will get you down the road, right? Where are you? What's the next step that will get you down the road? Same thing in faith. The question is, hey, you can only start where you are. I know we've had some Star Trek fans in here, and so maybe you think you don't have to start where you are. But for everyone else, we need to start where we are, and we need to take the next step. And so we want to throw out some ideas over the next several weeks, some topics, kind of some broad things. But out of those broad ideas, for you to get some really specific things for your life, what is the next step for me in this big idea, this spiritual topic of faith? And so that's what we want to do this morning. We're talking about taking the next step in becoming a servant. The next step in becoming a servant. And here's why. We will never be fully followers of Jesus without becoming servants. Right? It doesn't matter how many Bible verses you know. It doesn't matter how awesome your attendance is here. Like you've got the gold star from Epic because you haven't missed any in the last month, right? It doesn't matter how much money you give, though, as Tim said the last couple of weeks, that's something God's called us to do for those of us that are Christians. It doesn't matter those things. If you are going to fully follow Jesus, you will, somewhere along the way, have to become a servant. You will absolutely, somewhere along the way, you will have to become a servant. Here's the way it's defined, just kind of in the world sense. A servant is a person who performs duties for others. A servant is a person who performs duties for others. While that definition helps us in some ways, it certainly includes what we're going to get at. It really misses the underlying motivation for the kind of servant that Jesus wants you and I to become. Right? Because it's not just doing something for someone, but it's the intent with which we do it. It's what is our underlying or foundational motivation for doing what God calls us to do. And there's a text that we're going to be taught from this morning that really embodies so much more of what a servant should be besides just that definition of a person who does some duty for someone else. So we'll be in Philippians chapter 2 if you have a Bible. If you need a Bible, just lift your hand high. We've got all the aisles covered, making sure that you get one. Just lift your hand high. This is yours as a gift. You can use it this morning. You can use it. It is yours to keep. You can keep it ongoing and bring it back with you weekly. Read it throughout the week, whatever it is that would be helpful to you. You'll also see the Next Steps booklet we put in all the seats. So make sure you get one of these. Doesn't necessarily just for this series. This is just a thing we put together really with broad categories of where you could be along your faith journey, following Jesus. And so there's some great resources in here. Obviously, it's not an exhaustive resource, so we'd love for you just to keep this with you as you journey throughout faith and really as you do so within the context of our church here, Epic Church in downtown San Francisco. So Philippians chapter 2, page 636, if you have one of those Bibles just handed out. The rest of us will have to find it on our own in some method, table of contents, or ask your neighbor. Philippians after the book of Ephesians. Would you all stand with me as we read 8 verses? The first 8 verses in chapter 2 of Philippians. Paul is writing this church in Philippi. He's writing this letter to them, most likely in around AD 62. He's writing from prison, and the theme of this book is really joy. Now, you'll see things about suffering and other things in the book of Philippians, but the book's theme is really about have this joy, know what is yours in Jesus. And what's so interesting that Paul would write a book about joy is that he's writing from most likely a Roman prison. All right? I don't know that would be the first word. Anybody ever toured Alcatraz? Anybody been to Alcatraz? Joy doesn't come to mind as I walk through the halls of Alcatraz, but Paul says, hey, I want you to be joyful. And here he's going to get after something that's going to be helpful for us becoming servants this morning. Chapter 2, verses 1 through 8, Paul writes, so if there is any encouragement in Christ, any comfort from love, any participation in the Spirit, any affection and sympathy, complete my joy by being of the same mind, having the same love, being in full accord and of one mind. Do nothing from rivalry or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interest, but also to the interest of others. Have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus, who though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but made himself nothing, taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men. And being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. You may be seated. One of the most descriptive passages in the entire Bible about who Jesus is, what he became, what his motivation was in becoming who he became. And then you go on and read it through verse 11, and it just gets even better about how every knee is going to proclaim that Jesus is indeed King. So that's whether we do it in this life or the one to come, we will all proclaim, as verse 11 says, that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Right off the bat, what I see Paul saying is, hey, don't just consume, but contribute. Don't just consume, but contribute. He gets going in verse 1, and he's going to say, hey, have you gotten anything out of this love of Jesus? Have you gotten anything from the Spirit? Let's look at verse 1. He says, if you've received any encouragement in Christ, if you've got any comfort from his love and the love that's produced in this congregation, this community, any participation in the Spirit, like any of the supernatural stuff you've seen, it's happening, you've been a beneficiary of it. If you've received any affection, if you've been given any sympathy. He's saying if you have gotten these things from Jesus, if you've gotten these things from being a part of this community of faith, God's Spirit working in you, you get benefits from it. You've been receiving. He's saying if you've been on the getting end of this, it's time for you to bring something to the table. You see it in verse 2? Verse 2 is going to say, hey, I want you to do something. So first things first. He's saying if you've gotten this, like if you've been encouraged, if you've got the love, if you've been comforted, then verse 2 says, I want you to complete my joy by having the same mind, the same love, like being in full accord, being one and unified. And again, he says, of one mind. Do you see what Paul's saying in verse 1? He's like, hey, have you gotten any of these things? Have you received any of these things? Have you benefited from any of these things? If you've benefited, then it's time for you to bring something to the table as well. Why? Because Christianity isn't this spectator thing where we watch God do amazing miracles and we just sit and clap. He's invited us into it. So you see verse 1, he said, hey, if you've gotten any love, if you've gotten comfort, if you've been encouraged, if you have received affection, if you have any sympathy, like you've seen the sympathy of God expressed towards you, then what you need to do is become like this. You need to add to the conversation. You need to be a participant, not just a spectator. And so he says that right off the bat. And one thing to understand for all of us this morning, while there is an incredible receiving component to our faith, there is an equal giving component. Does that make sense? Listen, you and I are never going to get in the game, so to speak, if we don't understand and receive who God is and what he's come to do, most notably in the person, the life, the death, and resurrection of Jesus for us. First things first, let's receive that. So if you're not on the receiving end of that this morning, I want you to know that's why our church was brought into existence by God and through people working hard to bring it into existence. That's what we want you to hear. That's what we want you to understand. There's something to receive first. But Paul would say to the rest of us, I want to say to the rest of you this morning, there is a great receiving component, but there's an equal giving component. And you won't even understand, I won't even understand what this is all about if we make all of life about us, and we even can make our faith about us. Here's how we make our faith about us. We're in it just for what we can get out of it. But we never have any interest or anticipation of providing something to it. And one of the things that's been beautiful about our church getting off the ground is that there was no way that I could stand up here and do something, everything just fall into place. It had to be a group of men and women, even families, coming together and say, you know what, we want this for us. Like people, we want to be able to have a church like you're trying to start to go to. And we also realize that we're going to have to help create the church that we want to go to. If we're going to do this in the future, right, it's not just our past story. It is our current story. It will be our future story. If we want to continue to God working through us, create the church that we think he's calling us to be, then it's going to take people come in and say, hey, let's roll up our sleeves. Let's do our part. Let's serve well. And so there's this equal giving component. You know, why are we here this morning? I mean, we could be here this morning to meet people. We could be here this morning because we wanted to hear great music. And, of course, those people that just wanted to hear great music are already done before I get up and do the lame thing I'm doing. Or maybe we want to hear a message that would be helpful for our lives. Or maybe we even wanted to meet our spouse here, right? I mean, that could be a reason. And some of you, this is not a bad place to meet your husband or wife, all right? It is not. Anybody looking today? Like, just be honest. First time, the classifieds are free. There's a small percentage that comes to the pastor for his matchmaking skills. But other than that, there could be a host of reasons why we are here this morning, right? I don't know what your reason is. Like, I don't have any idea. what your reason is. But here's some reasons that could be, besides just those, which are good reasons. It could be that some people are here this morning because you knew there would be people in our community coming and you wanted to serve them. It could be that you got here early this morning and some of you are even going to stay late. And yes, that could be open to any of us because you want to serve people. It could be you know that there are first-time guests that walk in our doors every single service, every single Sunday. We average over 10 first-time guests just through the summer. And you know what it was like to be the first-time person. And you want to make sure that someone has an opportunity to connect with them. And so you're going to show up early and you're going to look for people you don't know. And you're going to have these kinds of conversations with people you don't know. Why are we here? Paul gets at the heart of motive in verse 3 and 4 of Philippians 2. He says, do nothing from rivalry or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Count others more significant than yourselves. Why does Paul say to do this in humility? Because if you don't have humility, let's be honest, I'm gonna share my junk and you're gonna just nod your head because this is you too, okay? That's your part. I'm not going down alone. When left to ourselves, all of our hearts lean towards us being most significant, right? When left to our natural inclination, every one of us, I don't care how many volunteer hours you have. I don't care that the Red Cross knows your name. I don't care that you are Miss or Mr. United Way. No matter what you and I do with our lives, when left to our own devices, the natural inclination of every single one of our hearts is to lean towards self-preservation and self-exaltation, right? Survival first, and when we know we're going to survive, then we want to really thrive and think and have everybody else kind of think that we're the stuff. And that's what we live for. Without humility, you will never consider another human being more significant than you. Not with your spouse, not with your parents, not with your kids, not with your coworkers, not with your roommates, not with any other person sitting in this room. And let's be honest, if we think that we're most significant, then we don't care what time we show up here, do we? If we think we're most significant, we don't care what we do when we are here, as long as it's comforting and convenient and pleasurable to us. Right? If you're part of this community of faith, like this is your church when you go to church, but if you think you're the most significant thing, then you don't even care if you show up or not. Right? When faith becomes all about us, if you're a part of this community of faith, Epic Church, when it becomes all about you and you're just like, well, I don't know, I don't think it's not going to do anything for me today, so I'm out. I want to know if we could adjust that a little bit and realize, hey, how do we live this out? How do we, verse 4, not only look to our own interests, but also to the interests of others? I can imagine that Paul is sitting there. He's writing this letter to the church at Philippi. And I guess when you're in prison, you can become a good letter writer, right? I mean, it's not much to compete with when you're in prison. So I can imagine that he's got his fresh ink and probably not an epic pen, but you never know. He was a prophet. And he's writing, and I see him writing verse 4, and I can see him going, he's changing the words, and he's finally arriving at what we have this morning. That's good stuff, he's thinking probably. Like, this is really good stuff. But then I think he's going, how can I really make this stick, though? How can I help people become verses 1 through 4? How can I help them contribute? How can I help them think as others more significant? How can I help them look to the interests of others? How can I do that? Gosh, how can I make that happen? And then you see in verse 5 through 8, I think he had this aha moment like, oh yeah, I need to help them see what Jesus did. Do you see it? Because he's going to shift. He's going to go, hey, do this, do this, do this, be this, be this, be this. Oh, yeah. Let me show you what Jesus did. That's how he's going to drive home his point. Let's see it in verses 5 through 8. Pretty incredible. Just to realize this shift. He's going, hey, do this, don't do this, make sure you do this, consider other people more significant, put skin in the game, contribute. And then he's going to say, verse 5, have this mind among yourselves. Oh, yeah, which is yours in Christ Jesus. Yeah, let me show them Jesus. And then he gives us the path of Jesus. In verses 6 through 8, he says, first things first, though he was God. Though he was God. Not just Son of God, God in the flesh. Though he was God. He did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped. He did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped. Meaning this, that though Jesus was God, he didn't hold on to the privileges of all that he could by being God. What privileges? Well, he is living in heaven and people are singing worship songs to him. Right? And not just people, all the heavenly beings. Not a bad gig, right? You ever been serenaded by angels? While you're seated on a throne? That's what he's doing. So he's seated on a throne in heaven. He's all sufficient, but he humbles himself. It says in verse 7, but he made himself nothing. Let's don't run past that phrase, and here's why. Sometimes when we see the story in the Gospels, the death of Jesus and the arrest and the crucifixion, what we begin to think is this: man, Judas sold Jesus out, and that made Jesus nothing. Peter denied him, and that made Jesus nothing. Those evil men, they arrested him, that made Jesus nothing. They tortured him, and that made him nothing. They ultimately killed him on the cross, and that made him nothing. Who made Jesus nothing? Verse 7. He made... We are all in the same text, right? When it's rhetorical, I'm going to tell you, all right? Who made Jesus nothing? Made himself nothing. Judas didn't do it. Pilate didn't do it. Those who were yelling, "Crucify him," didn't do it. He made himself nothing. Taking the form of a servant. Can you imagine any king in our day and age, or any president for that matter in our day and age, taking the form of a servant? And yet here we have the King of all nations and the King of all kings taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men. Now let's be honest. If you're in heaven and people are worshiping you and you have to become a human, which human, just tell me out loud, which human are you going to become? Come on. Like if you could be one person, who would it be? What would the body look like? Give me that. Right? I mean, Jesus has this chance. He's like, okay, well, if I have to be human, in my mind, I'm going, man, pick something good. I mean, get chiseled. I mean, you can, if you're the creator, you can provide this, right? I mean, you can do, in fact, if you can do that, could you do it for me? You can do anything, and he chooses. Remember, he goes from all sufficiency. He needs nothing from no one, and he chooses. As he's born in the likeness of men, he chooses first to be born in the likeness of an infant. Lindsay Lee on our staff, she is about 2.5 weeks away. Can anybody confirm that, Ben? 2.5 weeks. Lindsay, 2.5 weeks? All right, and the employee pool, the staff pool is already closed, so nobody can get in on that. I think I'm going to win. I have the 19th and the 20th. I think I'm going to bring it home. What do I win, by the way? Oh, namesake. That's right. Now, his dad's name is Benjamin, too, so you guys just have to make your own assumptions about who got it right. But she's about to bring this little baby into the world, which we're excited about, knowing Ben and Lindsay since they were college students and watching them progress. But he's going to be so helpless, right? And without our staff really helping them along. And by the way, just so you know, on our staff, Will Maraza on our staff, he is a male, yes. He knows more about the whole prenatal labor delivery thing than anybody I've ever met. All right, including my nurse and doctor that deliver my kids. We're in the room having a discussion one time, and somebody's like, no, that happens at week 36. And Will goes, no, actually, that happens at week 37. And let me tell you why. I'm like, I should be writing a message right now, but I'm about to Google this. Sure enough, Will Murad, like, he's right. He knows what's going on. So ladies, he's not a doctor. He won't see you, but if you have pregnancy, labor, delivery questions, Will Maraza, the guy with the cool hair. Of course, without hair, everyone has cool hair, I know. But Will knows. So he just knows that. And so thinking about Lindsay bringing this little human being, and I mean, hopefully he's not like the burrito, but he's bigger than a burrito now, right? Coming in at 5-something at hopefully a couple more weeks. He's going to be helpless. And out of all the options Jesus has to enter human history, he does so in this form. Not because it had to go down like that, but he made himself nothing. He was found in human likeness, and he humbled himself. Who humbled him? He did. The cross didn't humble him. Hear that, please. The cross did not humble Jesus. Those who arrested him did not humble Jesus. Judas selling Jesus out did not humble Jesus. Jesus humbled himself, ultimately leading to obedience through death on a cross. A lot of people want to know, maybe that's even why you're here this morning, what's the essence of Christianity? Like Ben, I've grown up with these thoughts. I've seen these crazy things. Like, is this a political thing? No, that's what they thought in the first century. They missed it, and people are still missing it. Jesus is not a political thing, thankfully. The essence of Christianity is rooted in an unlikely act of a servant king. Whatever you're thinking it is, whatever you believe it is, whatever you've been led to believe, maybe led astray to believe that it is, the essence, so we're all on the same page, of our faith in total is an unlikely act of a servant king. And if you become a servant, it will absolutely cost you something to begin serving. It cost him something, didn't it? It will absolutely cost you something to begin serving as well. It will cost you time, comfort, convenience. But here's what's crazy to me, if I'm just being honest this morning. I've been honest the whole time, by the way. So we say, like, sacrifice. And we're going to ask you, become a servant. Volunteer. The crazy thing to me is that you still end up with the rewards. That's what's crazy to me. I don't know if you've ever forged a friendship or relationship with someone in the context of serving, but those friendships and relationships are unlike any other relationships I have. Been on a mission trip with someone, and just to be honest, you couldn't believe and hope that they weren't going to go on the mission trip, right? But because you start serving some kids together, you start building something together, you walk away and the relationship is like unlike you could ever have imagined it. So when you begin serving around here, you're going to have new relationships, and not just relationships that are sort of like, we kind of do it when it's convenient. No, it's going to be forged in the context of serving. If you were to serve in Epic Kids, I mean, just think about this. Will it cost you something? Absolutely. Could a kid puke on you? Yep. If a kid does, we will do dry cleaning for you for free. After we high-five the child, we will do your dry cleaning for free. But imagine being in that room, just right down the hall, and seeing a 6-year-old little boy understand for the first time in his life, see the lights come on in his eyes as he understands for the first time in his life that God has a purpose for him, and Jesus loves him in a way that he could never imagine. As a father of a 6-year-old boy, I'm saying, come on, would you do that? Would you begin serving in that capacity? Imagine if you have a musical gift, and we've established week after week that I don't, and so I'm off the hook, right? God is not holding me to this. But some of you, he is. Imagine being able to stand on the stage with electric guitar, I think, bass guitar. Imagine being able to let God use you on this stage. Will it cost you something? Yeah, you'll need to know the music, please. You'll have to get here 7:30, 8 o'clock, unless you do the 6 o'clock service at night. But imagine God using your gifts to lead human beings to encounter the divine God. Listen, I know you probably make some great, cool stuff, those of you in technology. Keep doing it. But please don't tell me it compares to standing on a stage if you have a musical talent and leading another human being to experience the worship of God. Please don't. Please don't. Will it cost you something to host a group in your house? Absolutely. It'll cost you some time to clean up, or at least, 30 minutes to find a closet for everything, right? Everybody comes over and they're like, your place is so clean. You're like, yep. And everybody's like, do you have a maid? I mean, what's going on? You're like, nope, but you can't go in that room, that room, that room. And only one bathroom works tonight, right? It'll cost you something, absolutely. But imagine this, a thing that you thought would just be a place that you would live in because you could afford it, just a place to lay your head or a place with a great view. What the reward would be to see God transform that space into a place where he changes life in the context of Christian community. Guys, we have to be able to start seeing what's not seen on the surface. That's what we're asking you to get on board with this morning. Start seeing stuff that's not obvious. Like you're going, I don't know, it sounds inconvenient to start doing this. The crazy thing to me is that, you'll have to sacrifice, it'll cost you something, but what God's going to do is pour out blessing and reward. It's kind of like I can't even call you to something that difficult because I know what you're going to get on the back end. Here's the deal. We are going to continue to say around here, please volunteer. And we use the word volunteer because it's a great universal term, right? If you go to the airport and you need some information, you're looking for a volunteer, maybe a t-shirt. Or if you're at a concert, you're looking for a volunteer. And so we use that terminology, and we'll continue to use that terminology. But for the sake of this morning, I want to differentiate, make a distinction between a volunteer and a servant volunteer. Let me give you just 4 thoughts, just so you can begin understanding what's the difference. Because we're going to ask, hey, come help us get the job done, but if we could become servants and not just volunteers, I think that would be far better. 4 distinctions. A volunteer gets the job done. A servant, however, pours their heart into the job they are doing. A volunteer does what is asked of them. A servant goes above and beyond what is asked of them. A volunteer sees their role as an assignment. They need to show up. Please do. But a servant sees their role as a calling. A volunteer will serve a couple of hours in a formal way. A servant will make serving a way of life. See, if you begin to volunteer at Epic, it's going to help us provide ministry and keep moving forward. But if you become a servant, it's actually going to help your neighbor. It's actually going to help those people that you work with. It's actually going to help those people under the same roof as you. Because when you and I become servants, everything changes. We're no longer doing it because it's a program. We're no longer doing it because we signed up for it. We're doing it because Jesus has led the way. He's poured it into us, and now he's asking us to pour it into others. What do you want to be? Volunteer or servant? We talk about this all the time, that we have 5 real key areas. There's lots more areas. To serve in Epic Kids, for those of you, I know you guys have a card, and so I'm getting to that point where I'm about to make the sales pitch, okay? So get your best face on. If you start serving in Epic Kids, as you see the second one in the card, it's going to cost you something, but you have an opportunity to share the love of Christ with children on a weekly, and you don't have to do it every week, but they're going to be there every week. Not only do you have a chance to do that with them in age-appropriate ways, but you allow their moms and dads, sometimes for the very first time, in an age-appropriate way in this room, at least I hope it's age-appropriate, to learn about the purpose and love of Jesus for their own life. Pretty outstanding. Secondly, hospitality. Do you know that our hospitality team makes an impression on people who come to our church long before Brad and I get the chance to do so? Do you know that? Doesn't matter how good the music is or how good the teaching is or isn't, right? The hospitality team can set the tone long before we get a chance to in here. They create an environment. From the beginning, we said, hey, we genuinely want to be known as the friendliest church on the planet. Not in a fake way like, hey, I'm getting paid to smile, but I'm not real happy to see you. You know, like, hey, we're glad you're here. We're expecting you to be here. We're going to show you that. We're going to take care of you. We're going to connect you. So that the hospitality, again, the musical gift thing, God's given me a free pass on. But if you have the gift, he's not giving you a free pass. Come, lead. Help us understand what God's up to in our church. The tech team, you know, they are responsible for lights, sound, video, the weekly podcast. So I hope you enjoy the fact that you can see this morning, the fact that you can hear this morning. That all happens because of the men and women who lead out in that area. And then the weekday administrative team. We have some just incredible people, not because they're not busy, who give of themselves. Maybe they work for themselves or they're in transition. So they on Mondays and Thursdays are just huge days for us in the office. We follow up on Mondays with everything that happened on Sunday, and then we get ready on Thursdays for everything that's coming the next weekend, and there's tons of other ways to help. And what you might be saying about all these things is, Ben, you don't understand. Those people probably just don't have anything else going on in their life, and I'm busy. Welcome to San Francisco, 2012. The people that were leading us in worship this morning, they don't have anything going on in their life. We've got full-time graduate students up here. We've got a pharmacist leading the way. We've got a doctor on the bass guitar. How busy are you? They're not nobodies with just endless amounts of time. Could we begin to serve? Hosting a group, leading out in one of our city partnerships, inviting your friends and colleagues to be a part of this. Listen, if you begin something for the first time, a lot of times it's difficult, right? Isn't it difficult? Changing your diet, is that easy or hard? Man, if it was easy, come on. Changing your diet and walking by the donut shop, that is really difficult. But here's the way I found it. With giving, like Tim talked about, with serving, really doing anything new and taking a first step, really. In the beginning, it's a discipline. It's hard. You got to stick to it just because you got to stick to it. But all of a sudden, disciplines become habits. And when you and I do a habit long enough, it actually becomes second nature to us. Can you remember anything that now is just almost like second nature, but you remember when it was really, really hard? And now it's like, I feel like I've been doing it all my life. It didn't start that way, unless you guys are more gifted than the rest of us. It didn't start that way. But that's what God's calling some of us to do for the very first time, to begin serving. So here it is, right? If you've only been consuming, it's time to start contributing. If you've only been receiving, it's time to start giving. If you've only been making withdrawals, it's time for you to start making deposits. If it's only been about you, it's time for it to be about others. It's your move. It's your opportunity. For Shauna's birthday last October, her birthday's this October too, but it's always in October. She wanted to go ziplining. And I was like, okay, next year I'm going to plan the birthday. But she wanted to go ziplining, and so we go up to Occidental. It's an hour and a half north of here, and you know it's going to be bad. And again, ladies, I know you talk to the men about childbirth and things like that, but the harness is really worse on us. Just stating the very obvious, okay? I know you got to bear the children and whatever, but for this one, we win the hardship. So they get you in this crazy harness that you can't breathe in, and then they put this dorky helmet on you, and then they try to get you to do these commands while you're down low in the low ropes area, and they're like yelling at me because I can't get the stop command down. And I'm like, man, that's the first time. And anyway, I finally passed the ground school, and they take us up to the top. They drive us in the back of this white truck, and they let us go. And in my mind, the platform around the big redwood is only about this wide. Like, really, I got to put my feet on top of each other. And I was scared to death to leave the platform for the first time, to take that first step. Scared to death. But let me tell you, by the third one, I was rocking it so much so that we've been back since. And I'll be glad if she wants to do that for her birthday this October. All right? I love it, but I had to take that first step. Some of you have been serving in our church. Some of you haven't. And it's just like you just don't know what it will be like to start. You don't know what it will be like to do something for the first time. Well, let me either encourage you or discourage you by letting you know that our church really is built on first-time experiences. All right, this will either encourage you or it'll discourage you and you'll never come back to our church, okay? I have never started a church before Epic Church. I have never been a lead pastor in any church that I've been a part of. And you're like, Ben, that's obvious. Tim Milner has never been an executive pastor at any church. Lindsay Lee has never overseen the small group system for an entire church. Brad has never done for any church what he's doing on a weekly basis, finding musicians from the ground up for our church. Josh Hamilton, who ran sound for us for quite a long time, he had never touched the soundboard before I handed him a 900-page book on how to run sound and get after it, and he did it. Ben Lee, who's now overseeing all of our media efforts, he's never done that. Minnie Lee has never overseen a hospitality team. She's never volunteered, period. Now she's leading the whole group of volunteers at 9:30 or 11 or 6 o'clock, depending on what's going on. Gabriel and Callie Beltran, who are now teaching 5 to 10-year-old kids right in that room over there, had never done it till they started about a month ago. This is kind of who we are. And if you're looking for experts, people have been doing it forever, we're not your place. But if you're looking for people who believe God has a calling on their life, people who are begging for God's favor, people who never let failure be the end, this might be your place. You're given a card. I'd ask you to take that out at this moment. We believe God's up to something great in our church. Just so you guys know, remember, we're still in August. Look around the room. A lot of people just at this one service. And in case you don't know, we do this 3 times on Sundays. 48 people were signed in, checked in to volunteer this morning and tonight. If God is going to grow our church and we're continuing to offer excellence in what we do from a service perspective, from a kid's perspective, from a follow-up perspective, we're going to need more of you not just to become volunteers, although that's the word we'll use. We're going to need more of you to actually become servant volunteers. And you're like, Ben, I don't even know which one of those 5 areas. We'll check them all and we'll just do eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Hope you have musical gifts if you end up with that one. And then right after the service, there's a reception, as Tim mentioned. You just walk right out there and walk up the steps, and it's just one door to the left. And so even if you don't want to volunteer, but you want to know which person on staff has the cleanest desk, just go right up the stairs and into the office. I hope it's clean. 2 challenges to close with. One is for those of you who haven't served before in any capacity at Epic. Would you start serving? Not to fill a slot, but to respond to a calling. And secondly, to those of you who volunteer at Epic, let's be honest, for some of us, it's just a job. Do you know that I can be your pastor and not be a servant pastor? You know that? Just make sure I deliver the goods in public and then kind of do what I want to in private. Tell you that I'm a big fan of yours in public and even on Facebook and in private be like, I hate that person. I can do that. I've seen too many pastors get away with that, unfortunately. For those of you that are already volunteering, would you become a servant volunteer? Would you let it be a heart thing, a calling thing, an above and beyond thing? Would it become a way of life for you? And if you haven't been volunteering, I want to encourage you to fill out this card. Come to the reception or drop that in the black bucket. Get a free t-shirt before you leave. This thing has moved forward from day one because of the favor of God and the faith and willingness of servants. We will continue to move forward. That's not just our front chapter of our book, okay? That's going to be the middle. And as long as God gives me the opportunity to lead this thing, that's going to be the future chapters as well. Do you want to be a part of the story? It's a lot more adventurous. Costly, yes, but much more rewarding. What's your move? Would you pray with me? God, I thank you for Philippians chapter 2. God, a section of scripture that has long impacted me, just going, I can't believe that Jesus did this. I can't believe he's God and he's stepping out of that role for a moment, at least in the privileged sense. He's not grasping onto that role so that we might grasp onto the God who's come in the flesh to show love and mercy, to bring salvation. Jesus, part of your mission statement was that you didn't come to be served, but you came to serve and to give your life as a ransom for many. We receive that this morning. And in receiving that, God, we know there's a giving component. God, could we come to the table, participate in this thing? Not just consume it, but contribute. Not just withdraw, but deposit. Not just us, but others. God, you've set the way in the life of Jesus. May we respond. May we follow. God, I pray many people would respond and begin volunteering at Epic. But God, I pray even more so that those of us who serve here would do so as servants, not merely volunteers. In Jesus' name, amen.